Hi there, welcome to Tiff Reads Books, where I read books and then I talk to you about them. I'm Tiff, and today I read The Girl from the Well and The Suffering by Rin Chupeco. Obligatory, I didn't read these today, but I read them recently and I've been wanting to talk to you about them. I've just been trying to figure out how I'm going to go about doing that because these were good, objectively good YA horror that I read, and I think I've only read one other YA horror book, maybe two this year. I would argue that My Best Friend's Exorcism is kind of YA on the older age of YA. And then also I read A Monster Calls, which is on the younger edge of YA. And a lot of the books that I've been reading this year in the horror genre that I really like have been dealing with grief and loss. And I think these two by Rin Chupeco kind of didn't as much. There was an element of that, but I don't think that was the horror, was the grief and the loss. And so I kind of wanted to talk about them because I just thought they were really good books from a YA perspective. And they were kind of I went through them so quick because they were just this breath of fresh air at the end of the month when I was feeling really starting to get slumpy, and just getting bogged down with stuff. So I really enjoyed these and I wanted to share them with you. Rin Chupeco is an author that I found this year. I read The Bone Witch by them, and I am currently reading Silver Under Nightfall, which is a vampire. Apologies, it's time for people to go home. It's a vampire horror, where we're following a vampire hunter, but that's not what I'm talking about right now. Right now I'm talking about The Girl from the Well and The Suffering. These ones were published in, I think, 2014 and 2015. They're a little older, but they, I think, still hold up in a kind of fantastic way. So I'll give you a brief synopsis of The Girl from the Well. The Suffering, I'm not going to because it is a sequel. Goodreads has it as a companion novel, but it is a direct sequel, so I'm not sure why it says companion novel. So the synopsis even says companion novel, but it's a direct sequel. So anyway, okay. In The Girl from the Well, we are following Okiko, who is a revenant, essentially. And this is based on a Japanese myth. Her presence is based on a Japanese myth of a woman from a young woman of the same name who was murdered. And in her life as a revenant, she is kind of an unreliable narrator. She is been around for about 400 years, and she's kind of pulled in all these different directions because she has become a creature of revenge, essentially. That is what drives her, but she still has some human emotions, and those start to come through more and more as the book goes on because of this attachment that she makes. So when we first get introduced to her, it is a brutal scene in the beginning of the book of her killing a man who has killed a child. And there's implications of other types of assault that these men that she ends up hunting and killing throughout the story have done worse than just murder to these children. But we never get direct graphic descriptions of that, which I appreciated, to have that underlying these are actually terrible people who are doing terrible things, but we don't have to get those scenes. And that was kind of a nice thing to have, where it's because these things do happen, but we don't always want to see them, depending on the type of horror you like. There are certain things are too much for me, and sometimes I can't handle that. So we follow Okiko, and at the end of that first chapter, there's a line that is, "Few stories begin with death. They often begin with grief." But this story is reversed, where we start off with a death and then we get into the grief. So Okiko finds herself drawn to a new city, and she meets this boy, Tark, who she ends up deciding to follow because she's intrigued by him, but she's not quite sure why. And as the story goes on, we learn that Tark also has a dark spirit haunting him as well. And the mystery is, why is this spirit haunting him? And also, why is his mom so violent and hateful towards him? Because as we learn, his mom is in an institution for attempting to harm herself and Tark. And she is also an unreliable narrator. We don't get anything from her perspective, but the conversations she has with people, they're twisty, they're turny. She's not 100% with us in a mental capacity. And we learn why as the story goes on. But we have Tark having to deal with the fact that the last time that he saw his mother, which is something that's introduced to us very early in the story, she attempted to kill him. And we have him grappling with that, and with a father who has a very busy job and who isn't around all the time. So they've moved to this new city where his older cousin lives with her mother, and his older cousin is actually a teacher for the younger age kids, a like para-educator at Tark's school. So we have kind of an older sister type relationship with his cousin, whose name I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But we kind of follow her a little bit and some of her interactions with some of the little kids in her school, and we get more about Tark and we get more about Okiko as the story goes on, and we start to learn about what happened to Tark as he was a kid. And in the middle, we get all of these scenes of Okiko just like killing people, basically. And it is just like eerie and kind of spooky, and the way that the other spirit that follows Tark around is described and the payoff at the end was built up really, really well. It was like we kind of learned things piece by piece as Okiko learned them. And because Okiko is kind of in and out and doing her other things, we learn it piecemeal, and we're also learning it from the things that she witnesses as well, because she actually goes and visits Tark's mom while she's in this care center, and so we get some of those scenes, and it's just like spooky and heart-wrenching all at the same time. But I really liked having the perspective from the Revenant, and it made it kind of extra level of eeriness, because Okiko has all these intrusive thoughts, which is like her revenant self kind of like pushing itself forward. It's the things that tie her to places. And specifically, she's a revenant for children. And so she's always going after people who've done that. But she'll have these like things where she just like tracks onto somebody, and she'll just start following them. And she'll be like having this conversation with herself. And then it's like, oh, I should do this. And then I'll kill. Like, and it's like, in the audiobook, it's so good, because suddenly, like, from one side or another, you have this kill, rip him to pieces, tear him apart, like all whispered in, while it's like her having this regular conversation, which to me means probably in the text is like parentheses and italics and stuff, like in the middle of conversations. And as an audiobook, it just works really well. So Okiko herself is a well-rounded out character. We find out as the story goes on what happened to her, why she is a revenant, why she's following Tark. We get her whole story fleshed out at the same time as we get the other characters, and her and Tark end up like building this kind of like friendship that's really kind of like wholesome, but also unhealthy in a way that's really interesting. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And the book ends with us like going to Japan. Tark is half Japanese. His mother is Japanese. His father is American. We get the story of how his parents met. We get time with them, in like with him and his dad in Japan. And this whole thing culminates like around the Cherry Blossom Festival, because of a religious aspect to that's necessary to the plot. And so we get these like really well described scenes. We meet lots of characters. We learn a bit about some religious practices, and it's just a really well thought out and well researched story that I really enjoyed, but also spooky as hell. And the audio narrator did a really good job. I think this was a 5-hour book, and I just listened to it in like a day. And then the sequel, The Suffering, we go back to Japan with some of the characters, and we spend our time in the Okigahara forest. But we don't focus on the things that forest is normally known for, which is, you can look it up, but we spend most of our time about this hidden city that's in there and some of the atrocities that might have happened there. And because it says in the synopsis, we get Tark and Okiko going together through this experience of discovering this lost city, determining what happened in it, and having to save the spirits that are there from their eternal discontent and having to relive the things that happened to them, because we follow the idea of like spirits being trapped to a specific place. So it's interesting because we get more Japanese culture in here and more history and some interesting ideas of things that might have happened, while still dealing with overall this friendship and the level of whether or not this friendship is healthy between Tark and Okiko. So the level of friendship between them and how their dynamic has changed since the events that happened in the previous book, and Tark kind of having some character development and Okiko having some as well, and then learning how to live in this new dynamic that they have. And it was really kind of interesting to see that and to see their different friendship of like a living person and a not living person, and how they could rely on each other and the things that they've learned through each other, with also some gore and some jump scares. And we kind of also get some commentary on like the ghost hunter shows that will go to these places where horrendous things have happened to people just for the sake of entertainment, and how those people treat the local guides that they hire and how they interact with people. And that was kind of an interesting conversation to be having in the background. And we're again getting more conversation of like different types of religious aspects and how those can be involved, and some elements of classism and sexism and the hierarchies within those, and the dynamics that they kind of create with people. So that was like a 9-hour one, and again, I like flew through it. I can't really talk about that one too much without spoiling the first and this one for you. So that's me trying to kind of give like just a little bit. But if you're looking for a horror book that doesn't have any sort of sexual assault in it, because a lot of horror tends to have that because it is horrific, these are great because they don't have that. I will say the one thing I didn't like about the second book is that in the beginning we get a lot of Tark in school and his interactions, and he's kind of unnecessarily really mean to teenage girls, and there's some commentary about teenage girls and stereotypes of them that are really unnecessarily unkind and misogynistic that we did not need. Those didn't need to be there. So that was a little bit less for me, but we do get away from that once we get out of the first quarter of the book and we get into Japan. But we do also have, I guess, so we don't have direct, in the second book we do have some implied sexual assault. We don't have direct view of it, but again, we have an implied and a conversation about that, but nothing descriptive and nothing graphic. The most graphic thing in this is the murders of people, and the way that we are described Okiko like just brutally destroying them. And so there's a lot of gore and a lot of violence, but we don't have torture and kidnapping and like sexual assault and all of those things that are usually in horror. So we still have the blood and the gore, but from a different, with some of those other things kind of taken out of it. I really do like how Rin Chupeco goes about building a world and incorporating religious and political and socioeconomic aspects without like making them a very big deal of the book, because in these short books like that it would be really impossible to have them be such a big deal. But we do get commentary on like socioeconomic status and classism and wealth, because Tark comes from a wealthy family and has that ability. We get some commentary on that. He goes to a really fancy private school. We get some commentary on that. So there's some interesting conversations to be had. But overall, I wanted to recommend these because they're a little bit older. Like I said, they were published in 2014 and 2015, but I have found them recently and they were free on Audible. So if you have an Audible account, they're free. And my local library has them on, I think they had them on Libby in a digital format. I don't think the audios were there, but the digital was at least. I'll have to double check on that for you. But overall, I highly recommend these. And if you have read them, I'd be happy to hear your comments on them in the box below. If you like this, give it a like. And if you want to see more recommendations on short horror, fantasy, other things that I'm reading, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you soon.